Welcome to ForexTV.com's PM Exchange. It's Friday, November 9th. I'm Remy Hokie. After a volatile week of trade in the FX market, Eurodollar is ending the New York session flat after hitting its highest level at $1.4752 earlier in the session. This morning's U.S. data showed a greater than expected narrowing in the U.S. trade deficit. This gave the greenback some support against the euro. Meanwhile, dollar-yen hit a 1.5-year low against the yen earlier in Friday's session. U.S. equities fell at the opening bell over continued fears about the credit crisis. After a session low of 110.50 yen, dollar-yen is ending the New York session around 110.75. And looking at the week ahead, Monday, November 12th is Veterans Day in the U.S. and also in Canada. The U.S. equity and futures markets will be open, but the bond market will be closed. So let's start out with a look at the global economic calendar for the week ahead. In this volatile trading environment, we will focus on fundamentals that will be watched by the market. All dates and times are in Eastern Standard Time. On Sunday, November 11th, in the overnight Asian session, there's a slew of data coming out from Japan. The Bank of Japan starts its two-day rate-setting meeting. In terms of data from Japan, October domestic CGPI, supermarket sales, bankruptcies, consumer confidence, and the September trade balance will be released. And on Monday, November 12th, we have the following events to watch. In the Eurozone, finance ministers will be meeting in Brussels. In the UK, PPI for the month of October will be released. And here in the US, the National Association of Realtors will release its pending home sales index at 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. On Tuesday, November 13th, we have the following events to watch. In Japan, the Bank of Japan will announce its interest rate announcement following their two-day meeting. The BOJ is widely expected to stay on hold. The key focus will be on the press conference with BOJ Governor Fukui following the rate decision. And in Germany, GDP and the ZEW consumer sentiment is scheduled for release. In the Eurozone, industrial production will come out at 5 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time. And in the New York session, the ICSC-UBS store sales data, Redbook data, and the Treasury budget data will be released. And on Wednesday, November 14th, the biggest day of the week for data, we have the following events. In Germany, CPI figures are scheduled for release, while in the Eurozone, GDP will be released. And here in the U.S., retail sales will be closely watched, followed by Producer Price Index and Core PPI. The U.S. data may add volatility to trading for the U.S. dollar following their release at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And on Thursday, November 15th, over in the UK, retail sales for October will be the focus in the London session. Here in the US, Consumer Price Index and Core CPI will highlight the morning New York session. And later on, the Bank of Japan meeting minutes is scheduled for release. The minutes will be watched for how the central bank comments on recent economic conditions. And wrapping up the week ahead, on Friday, November 16th, we have trade balance data from the Eurozone. And in the U.S., tech data will be released at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, and industrial production and capacity utilization will come out at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And that's a brief look at the economic calendar for the week ahead. Now we have your equities and commodities wrap up for the day. U.S. stocks ended in the red with steep losses in the session. After a volatile week, the Dow closed down by over 200 points and the Nasdaq tumbled 2.5%. Investors remain concerned as credit market woes have no signs of subsiding and as major banks warn of more losses to their debt portfolios. At the end of today's session, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 223.55 points, or 1.69%, to close at 13,042.74. The Nasdaq Composite Index tumbled 68.06 points, or 2.52%, to close at 2,627.94. The S&P 500 was off 21.07, or 1.43%, closing at 1,453.70. And in the fixed income market, U.S. Treasury bonds rose with the yield on the 10-year Treasury note down at 4.22% from 4.27% late Thursday. And in energy, NYMEX crude oil futures ended up with gains paring back from earlier losses. The benchmark crude oil contract gained 86 cents or 0.9% to close at $96.32 a barrel. Prices gained over concerns about inventories as well as geopolitical tensions over in Pakistan. In other petroleum products, NYMEX December heating oil gained 1.30 cents to close at $2.6188 a gallon. December RBOB gasoline rose 1.84 cents to close at $2.4560 a gallon. Over in the metals complex, COMEX gold ended down on the session but gained $26 on the week. December gold settled down $2.80 at $834.70 an ounce. In other metals, December silver gained 3 cents to close at $15.0545 an ounce. December copper fell 5.85 cents to close at $3.1455 a pound. And rounding out the action in metals, January platinum tumbled $47.60 to finish at $1,426 an ounce, and December palladium fell $1.25 to close at $376.25 an ounce. This afternoon, we're joined by Derek Fry from O&F Futures and Options. He'll give us his outlook for energy and metals futures.
Okay, taking a quick look at the action that we saw in the metal and energy sectors today. I'll start with metals. We've seen both gold and silver pushing to levels not seen for 25 plus years in the last over the course of this last week. However, we've failed to reach, in the case of gold, the Hunt brother highs of the 1980 highs, and in the case of silver, we're absolutely nowhere near those levels. So the overwhelming trend is still up, but frankly, our models and everything have given us some short signals here on the latter half of this week, and we are now short gold. I am expecting gold. Basically, I'm expecting to see 800 before we see 850 again. And you will see $1,000 an ounce, but it won't be this year. And it will very likely be next year, probably the second quarter of next year. But look for gold to begin to back off into next week. A little bit more than we saw today. Today we only saw a few dollars down. But like I said, definitely look for gold to crack the 8.25 level early next week, and then push on back down to 8. We could fall further than 8, frankly, but at this time it's too early to call that. So bottom line in the metals is look for a correction. If you're long, get those stops tightened up, because it's, like I said, you're likely to see 800 before you see 850 again. Moving over to energies, kind of the same story there. We've seen, all week we saw the media trying to jawbone crude to $100. They failed to be able to do that. My call here is very similar to my call on gold. I think you're going to see $90 before you see 100. Same thing as gold. You will see $100 a barrel in crude. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. But our models do show that it's more likely to correct back to 90 and possibly even a little lower than that as well, but at least back down to 90 before we resume the uptrend and the march towards 100. Of course, the situation with Pakistan and all the other crazy things that we have going on in the world geopolitically could change that in a geopolitical sense, but if in terms of technicals and everything else, both of these markets are pretty overbought, and the fact that the momentum was unable to penetrate those high levels, 850 and 100 in crude, 850 in gold and 100 in crude, is pretty definitive proof for our part that they won't be unable to pierce those levels in the very near term. So, like I said, overall, look for corrections to ensue next week. And look for that one-way street called the dollar down to also start to reverse. We've already seen the dollar begin to gain against the Canadian dollar. That tends to be one of the first currencies to react to dollar strength. So look for the bid to come back into the dollar. The fact that every guru, media person, and everybody else is saying down in the dollar is frankly a clear buy signal for a contrarian like myself.
That was Derek Fry, head trader at Odom & Fry Futures and Options. Thanks for joining us for today's edition of PM Exchange. I'm Remy Hokie. Tune in Monday morning for your latest news update right here on ForexTV.com. Have a great weekend.